Can you guys see me? Let me know in the comments. Thanks to everybody that's joining us. This is awesome. I'm excited to be back live streaming. Yeah, and I'm excited to talk about sort of where we've gone in 2023 in the war and where I think 2024 is going to take us. So, of course, guys, you know what's up. If you have a question, right, you can pop it into chat. Obviously, I'm still a YouTuber. If you throw me a super chat, you'll jump to the top of the line to get your question answered or comment read. I know we've got a bunch of people, as always, from all over. Always fun to see, Canada, the UK, Budapest, India. Very cool. And of course, plenty from the good old US of A. Yeah, so again, I really appreciate you guys. I sort of alluded to it, but you guys know, had a kid kind of recently. So, that's why the live streams have been lower in frequency, just because, priorities, man. You gotta do the parenting thing. But, we're on a good schedule now, and I can get back to live streaming, which is honestly one of my favorite parts about doing this, is getting to live interact with you guys. It makes such a tremendous difference. Sorry. I also have a new setup. If you see me looking around, I've got a third monitor. So, this will help me kind of cycle content around. Yeah. So I'm seeing everybody popping in. Lots of different. I'm surprised there's a lot of a European audience, which I find pretty fascinating. Just given that I think of myself as primarily a U.S. creator, and I guess it's New Year's Eve, but it's not that. It's 2 p.m., 3 p.m. You guys hopefully aren't at parties yet, Hey, thanks, 80s Bruce Sato. Yeah. Yeah, Happy New Year to you too. And thanks for the congrats. Yeah. Yeah, we're all doing good here. Yeah. So, I did a little looking up. And let's see. Let's see if we can pull this up here. I've actually got for you guys a early January Russian campaign assessment to see where we were about a year ago, right? This is a little later, but it's from Critical Threats. For some reason, some of the earlier stuff you could see they're not really this is as early as I could get us, but that's still pretty good. And so it's just a fun, interesting look at sort of where things have gone over the last year. And I thought it was interesting. First off, this January of 2023 was when we just started hearing about NATO states supposedly sending modern main battle tanks to Ukraine. Right? Joe Biden was preparing to send a significant number of Abrams to Ukraine, and right, that the U.S. was planning on announcing the delivery very soon. German was going to send at least 14 Leopard 2s. Poland was going to send some more Leopard 2s. And there was a number of other the UK sending 14 Challenger 2. So we were just starting to see modern main battle tanks get pushed to the front line. Of course, they assessed that the provision of main battle tanks to Ukraine will help enable Ukraine to conduct mechanized warfare to delete the Russian military and liberate their territory, which unfortunately, as we saw, I think there's a pretty overwhelming consensus that the era of sweeping mechanized warfare, it may have come to an end in human history, right? This may be the end of this type of mechanized warfare. I think no one was prepared for how drones and automation with an integration with artillery, man-portable anti-tank weapon systems, and just mines, just hard to counter mines, were going to just wreak havoc on mech warfare. And we've seen it, man. There's never been a war that has had more video evidence. I mean, literally, just the idea, guys. I just want to point out that, in the Second World War, it was incredible that people who weren't at a battle could witness any part of it. It was insane. And now we casually are like, oh yeah, everyone in the world can see. We can find combat footage from 2 days ago in Ukraine. We can tell you the unit. It's also crazy to think, like, you could DM the unit. You could literally pop in a telegram. You could find the brigade and be like, hey, I saw this video of the 43rd mech taking out these guys. I had a couple questions about your tactics. And, like, they might answer, which is madness, right? So it's just really a fascinating war to be able to see in real time, kind of the mechanized warfare of the 20th century sort of, for lack of a better word, wrap up, right? Come to a close. Crazy stuff, right? So this is, of course, from ISW. The West has contributed to this is a year ago. West contributed to Ukraine's inability to take advantage of having Russian forces pinned in Bakhmut by slow rolling or withholding weapons and supplies for large-scale counteroffensive operations. This may actually be correct, because at this time, Russian forces hadn't pivoted fully to the defense, and they still hadn't protocolized their defensive operations, right? The multi-trench system, artillery drone integration, extensive mining operations. They hadn't quite polished it up. And so if the West had just provided all the aid that they ended up providing and just front loaded it on day one, I think you actually could have ended up with a different outcome. But it's sort of a moot point, because, like we talk about, you can't just give someone a bunch of air defense systems, right? You've got to train their crews. You have to show them the capabilities. And then once they understand what they're capable of, they've got to come up with a plan to use it. You've got to have a plan to maintain it and replace it and get new missiles when the old ones are out, right? You see how even if you want to rapidly field equipment, it's still on a time delay, right? And so it may not have made a difference, right? The Russians may have just mined faster. It's certainly easier to deploy an anti-tank mine than it is to, take out to plan an elaborate mechanized offensive action. So I also thought it was interesting to see some of the names we haven't heard from in a while. Gerasimov, somebody who fell deeply out of favor, really after the Prigozhin coup attempt, right? Wild to think this is just as that coup attempt was wrapping up. Gerasimov is directly opposed to Prigozhin, who still is alive at this point. And you can see some of the repositioning and upper level Russian high command finagling of different roles, which is really interesting just to see the way that the Russian command at this time was really in what we now know is like a quiet civil war, that there was the Wagnerites and the MOD loyalists, and that they were jockeying for position of senior roles in this war, right? And we never really understood it, right? You just saw these kind of rando stories and you'd be like, well, what does it mean? And the answer was, that this was probably less about putting in optimal performing commanders and more about putting in people with the right loyalties. So here's what else I pulled up, which I think is fun. This is from January 3rd. This is actually right around the new year. So what I thought was interesting is, first off, you've got, let's see. Yeah, there you go. Okay. So you can see that largely the Kherson offensive had culminated and had liberated up to the Dnieper. And since then, there's been pretty limited advances. But what I also thought was interesting is look here around the Zaporizhzhia region. And you've got basically the exact areas where the counteroffensive took place was something that Russia was still sort of contesting or trying to wrest control of. And let's real quick pull up the control map of today, and we'll compare a little bit here, right? So here is the southern region today, and actually we may do like a classic style daily update on this, or I may just record one and drop it after this. But look here. You can see when people talk about there being very little change to the front lines, like this is the kind of stuff they talk about. I mean, here's the front lines before, and here's the front line today. So like for all of Ukraine's substantial counteroffensive actions, there's just so little change, right? At such a tremendous cost. Yeah. So, I mean, Ukraine definitely made some advances, like no doubt about it. Oh, thanks. B Mac asks how. Hold on, let's see. How are Ukraine treating their vets, and have Europe and the USA given any promises to look after them? As a fellow vet like yourself, I think this should be given priority by the USA and Europe. So I think for the US, the question is the outcome. Now, what's happened currently, the United States, part of their aid package to Ukraine, yeah, it's been mostly weapons, but there's also been some money, and that money has backfilled Ukrainian social services like a lot. Like all of their paramedics are paid by U.S. funds. And the paramedics, remember, are the guys who respond to missile strikes and all that. A lot of the Ukrainian health infrastructure is provided by, is also state funded, right? So the U.S.'s funds are backfilling that. I don't know about Ukraine's specific policies vis-a-vis veterans and veteran benefits and wounded veterans, etc. It's going to be tough. After the war, it is going to be tough because, as we see, even with the war ongoing, the West is still starting to wring its hands and say, "Oh, do we want to give Ukraine more money?" Oh, and you know, it's like there are some people who are just doofuses, right? I think kind of the U.S. Republicans are just dumb. Like, if there's a good argument for not giving Ukraine aid, then like make that argument. But just saying like, well, we've arbitrarily linked it to border security, like that's stupid. But there is a real argument to say, hey, you know, European economy, we can't spare this much of our defense budget, right? Russia could be a threat to us. You know, if Germany was to say, hey, we need to make sure our Leopard tanks are also running, like I would respect that. But Ukraine, but like the war hasn't even ended yet. So we don't know what the post-war is going to look like. The U.S. can't guarantee benefits because ultimately it's up to the Ukrainian government to decide what those benefits look like. Sort of like the U.S. GI Bill, you know, it was a tremendous benefit provided to World War II veterans, but it didn't really like emerge until the war was kind of on its later legs. Does that make sense? So without knowing how the war ends, you can't really plan for like veterans in society. But Ukraine is going to have a hard time because remember, some of the most productive regions have been destroyed. Even the ones that aren't destroyed are covered in mines, covered in unexploded artillery that have to be cleared. It's not clear that Ukraine will get back all of its territory. And it's also not a foregone conclusion that the Ukrainian government will have the like tax base to fund this. Often, you know, you hope that the West will roll out some kind of Marshall Plan. That's what I would want for our ally, right? You know, but it can be tough. It can be really tough to do, and it can be tough to politically sustain that, right? That's definitely a mistake we made in Afghanistan, where we supported in the 80s. we supported these guys in the 80s, but never really like when they beat the Soviets, we said, "Great, congrats, Afghanistan," and then we left. Matt Waller says, "I remember you from tour. I was a UK Royal Engineer. I I don't remember working with UK Royal Engineers. Were you in Nangarhar province?" I mean, thank you for the live chat, but it is so common. I've had several people come up to me and be like, "You look like someone I served with," but I think I just have a generic face. I don't know what to tell you. Huh. I mean, statistically, the chances maybe that was weird. Were you doing like construction work? I've I've no idea why. I mean, to be clear, as a battle space owner, there were always people coming and going from our battle space. Absolutely within the realm of possibility that a couple of UK Royal Engineers came in. Maybe like were you with like a provincial reconstruction team? I'm so curious. Okay. Also, I just want to shout out to the guy who changed his profile picture and name to Yevgeny Prigozhin. Uh, I mean, Prigozhin was a bad person, right? But now that he's dead, we can laugh about him, right? He was a war criminal who died kind of the way he lived, which is like in a cutthroat, brutal, thankless world. Oh, okay. So that Waller was like, I was with a PRT. Okay, that would make sense then. Um, yeah, we had the PRTs pass through a couple of times. I remember we got on sort of like, for lack of a better term, like some babysitting duty. That's what we used to call it. Just helping show them around and stuff like that. But yeah, hope you're doing well. And shout out to you remembering. Okay, unavailable asked, do you have TDS? I don't know what that condition is or thing. I'm literally Googling TDS meaning. Total dissolved solids. Water is considered a universal solvent because of its ability to absorb molecules from various substances, number of dissolved particles. Water is called total dissolved solids. I guess no. I'm drinking coffee. I don't know. I don't know what else you're asking. There is I put some creamer in the coffee, but like you ever use that sweetened creamer? I know this isn't really about anything, but um, a little bit goes a long way. And I keep trying to tell my wife this. Don't get me wrong. I don't complain about having a wife who's willing to like put the creamer in my coffee for me, but a little bit goes a long way. Oh, okay. C1 boomers like Trump derangement syndrome. I know. Okay, so like just hating Trump constantly. I don't think so. I think it's kind of weird the way like even though he stopped being, he like left the presidency 3 years ago, like he's still constantly in the media. I kind of respect it. Like he's sort of a genius. He is a media and marketing genius. Like credit where credit's due. Not that knowledgeable about government, not that sophisticated in his like thinking. I'm not like a fan of the guy, but I like my leadership to be really technical, to really get into the weeds of things. And I don't think he did that. I think he was more of a vibe kind of guy. Um, and but yeah, they're just like people really think he's like Satan incarnate. Yeah, somebody says he lives rent free in people's heads. Yeah, that's exactly it. And like I sometimes joke. I'm like, listen, this is like an election between two like geriatrics, basically, and I'm like, neither of them are like young enough to be that like dangerous. Like obviously, I think, yeah, neither of them are that. Anyway, that's not important. Yeah, one of them is just a media like a just a he's just a media genius. Like he just like instinctively. It's crazy. It's like Hunter S. Thompson said about Nixon, you know, there was just something about him that was like so cunning. And Hunter S. Thompson like hated Nixon, but he was like, Nixon is just like I think he compared him to like an animal, just like perfectly evolved to thrive in a certain type of world. Okay, let's talk. Here's what I wanted to take a look at, some other stuff, right? Here is a who controls what in eastern Ukraine. I really want to hold on. I'm going to try to get this bigger because this is so small. Let's see if I can save this image and then open it. Oh, wait. I think I can make this easier. Can I go to just view? Yes. Okay, beautiful. All right, this is what I'm here for. All right, this is actually the January 3rd line. So you can see what I thought was interesting. Here's a bunch of fighting in Savote, Kreminna, Lyman, Lysychansk, right? And then you have Bakhmut being fought over. And you can see now you've got basically the same situation. Let's see if we can find Savote, but I'm pretty sure that's not held by anybody. I think it's still Ukrainian controlled. I mean, you can see that there's another Stepova. Yeah, you can see Lyman, Kreminna. Just so little has changed. Oh, there's Svetova. So again, to me, oh yes, Svetova. Yep, Russian controlled. Just like almost no change. You look down and you're like, great, here's Lysychansk. Yep, right inside Russian control. You know, the only changes are basically Bakhmut. You know, and even Bakhmut, the Russians came in, the Ukrainians kind of rolled them back, you know. Oh, and guys, if you like this, kind of like throw me a like. I think it'll help tell the YouTube algorithm this is a popular live stream. Especially I've heard, actually, I don't know if you saw the video from I think it's one of the Ukrainian channels that's run by the Ukrainian government that does daily updates. They said they actually got YouTube accused them of having artificial traffic. So yeah, it helps to like show that like, yeah, I have real traffic, real fans and stuff. Yeah, let's see. Okay, here is another who controls what in Ukraine. Let's see if we can zoom this in too. Right, this is kind of an overall look, but I think it's really interesting. Okay, so I mean, just look at this line here, right? Bakhmut, Donetsk. I mean, you can just see how, for all this effort, just in the grand scheme of things, how little has changed. Oh yeah, Reporting from Ukraine was the channel that said that it was getting accused of botting, which I think is actually pretty crafty because I think my theory, right? Russia's been trying to shut down like English language Ukraine content creators for a long time. Remember, they hacked that Indian media company and then used their account to copyright strike a bunch of creators' videos. It seems like YouTube stopped that quietly. But now it seems like they have these Russian botnets and they are intentionally, blatantly directing them to that. My theory is that they're actually they're targeting these accounts and flooding them with fake bots so that YouTube steals their money and goes, oh, we know your account's been botted. So, okay. Interesting. Stephen Booth asks, seems to be a World War I type meat grinder the past year. At some point, it needs to break. Yeah, and this is there was another question about what Ukraine can do to win and what the next year is going to look like, and that is a question that's the $1 billion question, literally. So when we look at the map, here's what I think. Ultimately, Ukraine is pivoting to a more defensive strategy, right? Highly efficient, highly effective, very, very like cost and lives effective. But it means that they're going to have to yield small slivers of ground to Russia. And what's interesting is that this is the exact tactic that Germany pivoted to in the First World War. All right. After around year 2 of the war, they realized, hey, we can't beat the Allies. So what we can do instead is attrit the Allied forces. And so Germany became experts at their defensive warfare. Experts. And they prolonged the war for a tremendous amount of time. But the other countries were just willing to accept also just absolutely insane levels of casualties. The UK, France, especially the difference is, though, well, Germany was also fighting in France. France was fighting to restore their country. Russia, right, also fighting. So Germany just didn't have any strong allies, whereas Ukraine kind of does. And Germany was fighting this highly attritional World War I style fight on 2 fronts, whereas Ukraine only has 1 front that they have to fight the Russians. So they can inflict a lot of Russian casualties and hope for political change. I think that's the best Ukrainian strategy, is to basically drain the Russian economy, drain Russian lives out of the country, and never grant Putin the political victory, and literally just hope that the political situation forces a withdrawal. This sounds like I'm making this sound like it's desperate. It's not. Remember, the Taliban didn't win by beating the U.S. military, right? Like they lost almost every engagement they fought, but because they forced the U.S. military to continually maintain a presence in Afghanistan, to burn money and lives forever, they won eventually, right? The Vietnamese did the same strategy. They didn't win against the United States. The average Vietnamese soldier had 1 combat encounter a year with the United States forces. Other than that, it was about surviving and making sure that U.S. forces continued to have to work and take casualties until the political situation made it untenable. That's how the Afghans beat the Soviet Union as well, right? And those are non-state actors with very few state partners. So for someone like Ukraine to sit there and go, we're okay with yielding some territory, and we're going to pivot to these asymmetric tactics, that could become an absolutely frightening level of casualties for Russia, right? I suspect they might be able to just destroy, just grind Russian young men until the political situation makes it untenable. That is not a strategy that has been unsuccessful, right? Especially if Ukraine knows that it has friends that will give it some aid, right? It just won't give them a ton of aid. But they see now, right? Their modern defensive fight, it doesn't really rely on like mechanized forces. Like it needs some, BMPs to provide fire support or to do limited scope counterattacks. But mostly what they need is drones, and what they need is artillery munitions. And if they can keep the fight up, right, the West's production is rising, but just rising slowly. It'll rise to the level that the West can produce enough for Ukraine to win this fight. So anyway, that's my thesis for this coming. I think you're going to see Russian forces continue to make these marginal advances, and you're going to see Ukrainians focus more of their effort on attriting the Russian war machine and inflicting politically sensitive casualties. That is my thesis. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Okay, Trey asks, thanks for the super chat, Trey. He says, thoughts on why we forecast what we send to Ukraine. Some of it is, I think the biggest driver is that the reason politicians support Ukraine right? But for example, we never supported Georgia when they were invaded by Russia. The difference was that there was a tremendous, tremendous public outcry. And because of that, the elected officials want to show what they're doing for Ukraine. And that makes a tremendous difference. It also prevents, oftentimes, Russia accuses NATO, for example, of providing weapons, saying, oh, they're providing chemical weapons, or that they're saying, oh, NATO's providing whole brigades. We're fighting NATO. And for NATO to be like, slow your roll, guys. This aid package is some howitzers and some Patriot missile batteries. You're not fighting NATO forces. So I think it's both countering disinformation, transparency of where your tax dollars are going, which I totally support. And the fact is that it's just not going to be a secret, right? Like, it's not going to remain a secret for very long. So that's why I think we publicly acknowledge what we're sending them. And it helps keep the discussion honest. And so that's why I sometimes tell people, like, hey, message your representative and your senator if you're in the United States, or your elected officials. You would be shocked at how responsive they can be if they literally just get a text message. I think there's actually, let me see if I can pull it up. To contact my representative. Here we go. You can literally go to find your representative, right? You just go to punch in your zip and it'll send you who they are, and you can message them on the website. Here, I'll even put it in there. And you can just tell, you don't have to, don't be mean. Just be like, hey, I'm a voter in your district and I support continued aid to Ukraine, and I'm bothered by the fact that many you or many of your colleagues are holding up Ukrainian aid. I don't think it should be linked to other conditions. Thanks for what you do. Bye. You would be shocked. Remember, all those political donors that the politicians like cater to, those donors buy them ads to get voters to support them. So, like, if you just tell them, be like, hey, this is something I care about, you don't need to be like, I won't vote for you. It could be worth it. Anyway, Alfredo asked, is it possible that former F-16 pilots could volunteer to fly for Ukraine? I actually think it's highly possible. Ukraine already has sort of the legal infrastructure for foreign volunteers. My only question would be that, for non-Ukrainian speakers in an F-16 may have issues because they can't talk to other aircraft piloted by Ukrainian pilots who don't speak English, and they may not be able to talk to air traffic control. So the language barrier may become more significant. But I would think that about ground forces too, and yet Ukrainian English speakers, there were tons of English language volunteers in the Ukrainian ground forces. There's a bunch of Hispanic ones, like Brazilians and Argentinians and Colombians and stuff, and they only speak Spanish. So my thesis is that, maybe, and possibly as trainers, I could definitely see them being volunteer trainers, like just training pilots about tactics and weapon systems, or advising maintainers, right? Just anything where they're on the ground, it's lower risk, and they have a translator, a translator Ukrainian to English is going to be cheap, whereas a really skilled maintainer who can come into the hangar and be like, oh, you want to do this, that, and the other thing. Here's the parts you need. All right, Defender, thank you for the super chat. Hopefully the U.S. and Europe keep helping Ukraine. Many people died in this senseless war operation. Keep up the good work. Grading from the hellhole of Belgium. Well, you could do worse than Belgium. I spent a little time in Brussels. Brussels is fine. You guys have great French fries. Great. I used to love the French fries in Brussels. It was I literally learned only enough French to order French fries with samurai sauce. That's it. I memorized that phrase. If they asked me any questions, I would be like, no parlez-vous français. It was worth it. You know only one thing. I said s'il vous plaît. I feel for the Russian people, honestly, who are there's an honor and nobility in defending your country. But for many of these Russians, they're forced to this fight and have no choice. And many Ukrainians are, right? Many Ukrainians are mobilized or drafted and would prefer not to be. But Yeah, just being a 19-year-old Russian kid satisfying Putin's ego trip and getting absolutely smoked by a Ukrainian drone, like you never even see your enemy. That's that's just hard, man. That's just hard. This is a hard life. You know. So, what other questions do you guys have for me? I know I'm also hungry. I like went to the gym and I'm holding out for I'm holding out for New Year's dinner. I'm ordering pizza and I just but I'm like also so hungry. I'm thinking about fries. I'm like, yeah, fries would be great. All right, what other questions do you guys have uh for me, right? So, oh, what I did want to say is a huge thank you, by the way, guys. I know this is like the last day of the year. Um, the strike gum thing, dude, it has been so successful. I'm so pleased with it. Um, you know, and the people that try it, man, I'm even I'm shocked, and I thought it was great, right? Like I think it's like almost 25% of people that try it once reorder it. So, and one of my goals for 2024 is to get into physical retail stores and in the US. Um, so if I'm just putting it out to the audience, like if any of you guys have any insider baseball on getting into gas stations, like anywhere that they would sell an energy drink, that's what I would kind of like to try to do. But I literally don't know anything about this world. I don't know if you got to talk to the franchise owner, a buyer, or a distributor. Um, but I'm just putting it out to the audience here. If any of you guys have any contacts that could help me out, it would be appreciated. C1 Boomer is like before you. C1 Boomer, we just urged people to. Oh, is this frozen? No, C1 Boomer. I just put out that I just linked them how to contact the representative to tell them to pass a bill on Ukraine. Interesting. Stacking time is like if you're in charge of the counteroffensive, where would you start it? Okay. So the my answer for this counteroffensive, I would do what Ukraine's doing now, which is attrit Russian forces to the absolute maximum level and be like, all right, we are going to make it painfully difficult for Russian forces to continue to advance. And at some point, uh, you know, Russia will either have to stop itself, which would stalemate the war even more. Um, but the hope is that by inflicting just tremendous casualties, that Russia, the political situation in Russia will become untenable. El Fuego says, Strikeum has really helped with my physical rehab following eight months of hospitalization in 2023. Damn, dude. Well, I'm glad you are out of the hospital. 8 months is a huge stay. And I'm glad we could help you out. You know, again, and I'm mostly just glad that you're out doing stuff. Honestly, I'm glad you're out. 8 months is so long, dude. I mean, you guys know my wife is a physician, so like eight months is a long time. So you must be tough as shit, dude. I don't know what else to tell you. Ooh, Johnny asked, what happened to Wagner forces? All right, so Wagner forces ended up in a couple of places. One, some of them got sent to Africa, and that's because Africa is as far away from Moscow as you can get without going swimming. And that is where Putin feels some of them are safest. Some of them were actually recruited into the Rosguardia. Seems like lower level guys, the Russian National Guard, right? This way they are under Russian command and control, but they're not directly, what's the word I want? But they're not directly in the fighting, and they're not as a whole unit together, right? They don't want a critical mass of Wagner guys like going rogue. Then some of them actually got recruited by other PMCs, right? MOD affiliated PMCs like Redut, or I think there's someone called like Shoegoists. So that's kind of how this works. Oh, look, Crowley the Demon Cat gifted 5 memberships. Nice. I think you guys get access to a bunch of cool emojis, so you should definitely try it out. But thank you, Crowley. Dennis Streetfield asked, do you think Royal Marine Commandos training Ukrainian Marines helped them create a bridgehead opposite Kherson? For sure. Like, establishing bridgeheads across a water obstacle is literally the thing that Marines do. It's literally in the name Marines. And that, to me, is a fascinating pivot to this war, right? Like, obviously, you can see they share a land border. So the fact that amphibious operations are still taking place is sort of crazy to me as someone who, was used to being like, oh, Marines. The Marines hang out in Kandahar. Like, oh, yeah, that's what they do. 6-month tours. And so it just totally preposterous, right? Like, totally crazy to me that these guys are doing it. And also the fact they're doing it without a bridge. Like, it's a bridge head, but there's no accompanying bridge. They're literally just ferrying pontoon forces across. And again, it seems like that at this point they're just in meat grinder mode. They're just really efficiently taking out Russians, baiting them to try to push into Krinky, and then just having Ukrainian artillery just smoke them from the other side of the bridge, from the other side of the river, which is kind of brilliant. Though I'd really want to see the numbers, right? Because it's not about like every one Ukrainian casualty has to result in 2 Russian casualties. It may be like, hey, you have to beat, Russia may have 3 times the size of your military, so you may need to kill 6 Russians for every casualty you take. You may need to kill 12. So that math gets really tough when you start to scale it up. Let's see. Any other questions? Standing Time asks, do you think Ukraine could have further increased their Kherson offensive if they crossed the river at the time, if the bridge didn't blow up? I don't think so, man. It's so dangerous to cross a bridge under fire, man. You have to concentrate all your forces to this narrow little point, and you cannot maneuver left or right. It's so easy to just obliterate force. I mean, even when you cross the bridge head is so small, and it takes so much time to expand it out that it's a natural time for your enemy. Your enemy knows it too. Your enemy knows you have to do it. So all they have to do is watch the bridge. It's so hard and so dangerous. It's why Ukraine can't build a pontoon bridge anywhere in Krinky, right? They have to use these sort of flexible, mobile pontoons. Nowhere asks, what has war teach about life? I would say don't take it for granted. I don't know. You'd be if you want some analogies that this war is, I don't know, you could take from this war about your own life. I'd say never underestimate yourself, right? By all accounts, Ukraine had almost no chance, and they are now in a stalemate with what was supposed to be the 2nd or 3rd most capable military in the world. You don't have to solve all your problems right at once, right? Remember, Ukraine didn't really have a strategy to like beat the Russians, but when it started, and yet they just figured out how to stop them, and then they got them to withdraw from Kiev. Then they had to figure out how to beat them in Kharkiv, then figured out how to beat them out of Kherson, and now they've got to figure out how to attrit them out of so that they leave their country. But like they've already done a bunch of things that should have been impossible, right? So, you know, I think that's a good takeaway. It's like you don't need to solve every problem. You need to solve one problem and then confront the next one, you know? Let's see, what else? Yeah. So stacking time, where would they launch an offensive? My answer is pretty simple. I would urge them just not to launch an offensive, honestly. Oh, what's going on with my laptop here? I would urge them to just not launch an offensive, to like really rethink just is this a good use of time, right? Like is it more because what no what they've tried. They tried an offensive with all the best gear they're going to get. And it didn't go so great, you know? So like the question then becomes what can you do? And the answer I think is listen, the Taliban showed just mining and grinding and never and like letting the enemy pass through areas is a winning strategy. You can beat you know the Taliban, way broker than Ukraine, beat the United States, a military way more powerful than Russia. Took them 2 decades to do it, but you know they're already deep into this. So Neoxius, how much impact does Sun Tzu's Art of War have in modern warfare? So, it's tough to say. On one hand, right, by the time Western militaries were reading Sun Tzu, the like other thinkers had codified different aspects of war. The I think the bigger question is like he was the first to realize, as far as I know, that you could cut war down into established principles. That war was governed by an underlying set of principles. I wonder when it was published. I want to actually figure this out. Sun Tzu, Art of War, written. It was written. Okay. Let's see. I don't actually know when this was written. 5th century BC. Okay, so this is interesting because it was written almost concurrent with writers like Thucydides, who was the first historian and who was a historian of the Peloponnesian War, who also also was an early like person who was like, hey, there are principles to how wars are fought, and he alluded to them a lot. So I think that's kind of interesting. It's also interesting that it was translated into French and published in 1772, right? And then in 1905. So it makes me wonder if it makes you wonder if his thinking and the thinking of people like Clausewitz, was one of the other core military philosopher thinkers, who had a like more westernized perspective, if that makes sense. I mean, supposedly Sun Tzu originally wrote it because, like Europe at the time, commanders were often feudal lords who inherited their role and weren't and were utterly clueless. So like he literally would say things that sound obvious to you and I, like if your enemy is strong and you're weak, don't attack them. Or like, you know, attacking at night is good. That's obvious to you and I, but like that's because we can read a book. Like imagine having no written history. You have no qualification other than just being born to a rich family, and now you're in charge of an army and winning a war. What would you even do? You know, it'd be like if you had to run a space station. You'd be like, I don't even know how zero gravity physics works. Like, let alone how to run a space station. Like, you would just be so clueless that if someone wrote even a bad guide to like running a space station for dummies, you would eat that shit up. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's my rant about Sun Tzu. It is kind of a meme, I guess. So, all right, what else? What else do we got? What other thoughts? What other things do you guys want me to talk about? Somebody's like, oh, here you go. Yeah. I think you say the critique of geopolitical or show how you do your analysis. Okay. There's so many. Uh, yeah. So okay, realism. Okay, let me break this down. Realism is a geopolitical theory that simply says that if you're a state, you look at the power and tools and leverage in your arsenal, and you try to behave in a way that maximizes your benefit. And it is a way to understand how countries interact with each other, right? Um, the and I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to read your email. There are critiques of it, right? For example, treating all states like self-interested people is a little bit like when economists say, "Hey, every person is a consumer who makes rational economic decisions." We know that's not the case. We know that people have internal worlds, right? Like if you are broke and you need more money, you should work more hours or get a second job, right? That's the rational economic act. But a lot of people don't because they are depressed, because they don't have access, because they don't want to work that hard, because they, uh, you know, have other constraints, right? Like there's non-economic things that they can't account for. Um, and the so it treats states in that same way. Like, like they can't it just doesn't make any sense, right? Because states have internal worlds too, right? A democracy that has their leadership change every 4 years is going to behave differently than a state with an autocracy like Russia, right? That's had 20 years. So I think realism is a good starting point to understand states, but the reality is a bit messier, right? A state's behavior is realist, but through the lens of their internal political and cultural world, right? So, like, to Putin, invading Ukraine feels like an absolutely essential thing to do for his state, right? Whereas to everyone else in the world, they're like, this seems dumb. Like, this seems sort of pointless. Like, you did this for absolutely no reason. Um, and they respond differently, right? Like again, look at the fact that the U.S. economy and the German economy are like not not like the German economy is like the third largest economy in the world, but the U.S. has provided what 85-90% of the aid to Ukraine. You see what I mean? So like you have these like they behave differently. Their calculus is different, right? And Germany is doing it because it's limited in how much it wants to aggravate Russia, the people who give it all its natural gas. Whereas Poland, who hates Russia, actually proportionately, I think, is providing more aid than Germany. It's complicated. State behavior is complicated. That's the summary. Fabian Cortez, thank you. Okay, so there is so what is Russia's strategy in 2024? I think that's actually a really good question. Russia's strategy in 2024, I think it believes that Ukraine is closer to coming to the negotiating table than maybe they realize. I think Russia's strategy is kind of like three-pronged. The first prong is military. Their military strategy is going to be to continue to try to attrit Ukrainian is going to be to try to take more territory, because the territory you hold when you sit at the negotiating table, statistically, historically, is most likely the territory you're going to get. Second, their second strategy is, of course, to grind Ukrainian aid, right? Because Ukraine isn't backfilling its material as fast as it was, the ability to destroy lots of material is itself militarily valuable. It's like the old Futurama strategy of, hey, I'm going to throw so many soldiers at the killbots, eventually the killbot's going to run out of bullets and we'll win. It's not a great strategy, but it is a winning strategy. And literally that's their plan. And then the third prong is political. Putin is leveraging the information space and its political context and political like arms to pressure allied politicians and the allied public, the public that's Ukrainian backers, and Ukrainian and politicians within Ukrainian backing states to pressure Ukraine to negotiate, which is code for surrender, like give up their territory. So that's kind of the goal, right? You notice that that's been a narrative now, especially among people with ties to the Russian government in some way, that they are saying, hey, Ukraine should just sign away its territory. And that is why Putin is grabbing as much as he can, just digging out with his hands as much territory as he can get his hands on. Because it's a very Russian way of thinking. Okay. Let's see. A couple. PI says, watching Crazy Realism video I was watching. The first Ghost Recon, crazy how Tom Clancy predicted world events. Yeah, man. Tom Clancy was an OG, dude. I don't know what else to tell you. But it's because Tom Clancy, what he had that no one else had, a lot of these writers, like for video games and stuff, they don't know anything. Like, and I don't mean that as a criticism. Or they know how to tell a fun story. But like, Tom Clancy would talk to people at the Pentagon, and he understood, like, if you talk to a Navy SEAL, they'll tell you about their favorite gear, their plate carrier, their widgets and gadgets on their rifle. And that's cool. But like Tom Clancy was like, okay, let me talk to the people who plan submarine deployments. Why do we put the submarines where we do? What do we think the Russians think about us? Right? He would talk to a Pentagon planner and be like, tell me about what you think is happening in the next 20 years. And that, like, Tom Clancy appreciated that stuff was not just sexy, but like that was in some ways the real war, but where wars are won and lost. And he was able to look at that. And then when you talk to those people, you realize that, the US is trying to build the military today that we'll have in 10 years. And we're trying to decide what the military will look like in 20. Does that make sense? So like we need to know right now we're like, all right, what do we need to buy that's on the shelf or almost done because it'll take 10 years for it to get out to our military at scale. But they're also saying, all right, 20 years from now, what is the U.S. military's tools going to look like? What do we think they're going to develop? What's coming down the pipeline? Those people are really smart. And because the U.S. is so big and so well funded, it can actually sort of make reality, if that makes sense, right? We decided 25 years ago we needed super carriers. Carriers needed to be bigger and badder and more expensive. And when we did that, the Chinese said, we can't meet this carrier. We can't match them. We're going to build a specialty missile that does nothing but destroy super carriers. We're going to test it, and we're going to get this thing to work. So by choosing to build super carriers, they've forced China to build anti-super carrier missiles. You see how you kind of decide if you're big enough, you can make reality whatever you want it to be. So like we've decided that the coming century will be the century of supercarriers. Now, are those things going to go the way of the tank when a shooting starts? I think so. I think carriers are a World War II antiquated trash. So, yeah. All right, PI, would I ever do a rack video? The ideology of Putin's Russia video by Kraut has got me interested in what's going on in Eastern Europe. I would actually worry about getting demonetized by YouTube because Putin's worldview. Okay, there's Putin's actual worldview, which I think is highly realist, and then there's his propaganda, his Ruski Mir like campaign. The Ruski Mir campaign is so, I'm trying to think of how to not get demonetized, is so ethnocentric for Russians that it may actually not be able to be even like discussed on YouTube. It's sort of like if I made a video about the German chancellor in World War II. You know who I'm talking about? The bad guy. You know how he wrote a book, right? That I can't say the name of, but it's kind of a book that talks about some bad things. If I was to do a deep dive analysis of that, I don't think YouTube would let me monetize it. Even if I'm like, this is a bad man with a bad book, like this is what he says. YouTube may actually not like that because it's Putin's ideology is not that different. Like Russian culture is superior. Other cultures and languages are inherently inferior to Russian, and it is our duty to forcibly take over their countries and make them more Russian, which is, bad and not ideologically a ton different than, the Austrian painter who became a leader of Germany in the 40s. Interesting. Could I do it on my site? Maybe. We'll see. I try to keep the site combat video heavy because oftentimes I like this where I discuss a battle in general terms on the channel, and then I do a deep dive from that actual battle, which I think is actually a really, really fun way to do it. I really enjoy it. Anyway, guys, I think that's kind of it. I really appreciate you guys joining us. I love the fact that we had so many viewers. Just a lot of fun. And it's been great. I love the fact that I got back to the live streams. Thank all you guys for supporting me. Thank all you guys who supported us on Strike Gum. Again, just ping us in an email, or you can message us, I think, on the site. If you have any ideas to help us get into stores. But other than that, guys, thanks so much. This has been an awesome year. I hope you guys have enjoyed learning about the Ukraine war with me. I hope you've appreciated my analysis. I hope you and your families are staying safe, doing well, and are poised for a great 2024.